When Around the World in 80 Days was sort of first mentioned to me, it was put to me in quite glowing terms that I was the only person who could do this, and that the BBC felt it was going to be a very tough job, a very hard thing to do. Special qualifications were needed of stamina, grit, wit, all this. And so I was quite sort of flattered about that. So I said, I'll think about it. And I promised I'd bring the guy back in about 4 days. And I just thought about it for about 2 minutes. And I called up and said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. I'd just done about 8 films back to back from 1980 to 1988. We just finished A Fish Called Wanda. And there really was nothing of that standard or that quality around. So I thought, well, yeah, let's go and see the world, because I'd always wanted to. Anyway, I said yes. And it was about halfway round. I think we were stuck in Madras or something with these great sort of tankers not going anywhere. When someone actually, the director let on that actually I wasn't the first person they'd asked at all. I was the fourth person on the list of people they wanted to present it. And there was Alan Wicker first, and there was Miles Kington, a very good journalist, second, and Noel Edmonds third. So there we are. There were no rules to the game, really, when we were starting to plan Around the World in 80 Days, because nothing like that had been done before. And a lot of it was obviously going to have to be spontaneous, in the sense that the camera would be following me everywhere, and I would be, just seen doing the things that normal people do as you travel, and making mistakes, and this would be part of it. There was no question of sort of editing out the mistakes. If I couldn't speak enough Arabic to get a ticket at a station in Cairo, then it was no good. If I missed my footing on a ladder getting on board ship, that was all in. So there were no real rules apart from follow me around. But obviously we had to make contacts in the various places we were going to around the world to see, for instance, whether there could be a boat connection here, whether the railways ran, for instance, across India still, what the timetables might be. So we had to try and put the basic framework, if you like, just the sort of skeleton of the thing together before I set off, so that we weren't going to be absolutely stuck. But it all fell apart very, very quickly. I mean, the first thing was the Orient Express ended in Austria. It's supposed to go to Venice. There was a strike, so we couldn't go through the Alps. So we had to sort of then immediately improvise some solution. When we got to Jeddah, we found that the boat we were going to go in had already sailed. There wasn't another boat. There was no other way of getting across Saudi Arabia and filming. So, again, improvisation happened. So although we had the basics, they had to be revised as we went along, which kept a whole sense of thrill and excitement and nervous tension through most of it. Well, at the start of the journey, I was quite frankly terrified, because, as I say, there was no precedent for a journey like this. All of us, in a sense, were jumping off the cliff, hoping we'd make it work. I'd never done a documentary in which I'd been followed around by the cameras before. I'd always sort of had a script, or, sort of improvised when we were doing Monty Python possibly, but basically, I knew exactly what was going to be happening at each moment. And I was worried about how I'd survive the long journeys, about stamina and all that sort of thing. I mean, I felt I was quite old then. I mean, I'm very old now, but I was 45 when I started those, and that was the first real long journey I'd done for the camera. So I thought, how am I going to survive this? And will anything I say be of the slightest bit of interest to anybody? And what will we see, and how will it all work? So the doubts always sort of took over, as they do at the beginning. I mean, for every journey I do, I still, begin with all the doubts mounting up. And then somehow, once you start, and once it's going, and you're away from the sort of context of home and comparing it with other programs or whatever, you're just off doing the journey and doing it your way, then it becomes a little easier, and you're so busy just actually day-to-day filming that you don't worry. The doubts will slip away. I think Phileas Fogg would have probably thought my Passepartout was hopelessly inadequate. For a start, there were 5 of them, and none of them did my laundry or prepared my food. You know, that's what Phileas Fogg expected of Passepartout, was he'd have his sort of shirt neatly laid out on the bed in the morning, and he'd have his sort of cufflinks in and all that sort of thing, and he'd have his glass of whiskey available at 6 o'clock, and he'd have the food prepared for him, and he'd find girls for him and all that sort of thing. And my Passepartout manifestly failed at this. All they did was work on the filming, you know, the working cameras and sound and all that. So I had to look after my own wardrobe and my own costumes. So I think it wasn't a real Passepartout. But in terms of travelling companions, pretty good. There were many moments when I thought this isn't going to work. And they started very early on. As I've said, the delays, particularly the delay in Jeddah, and the problem of getting across Saudi Arabia. That did seem at one time really insoluble, because the Saudis were adamant that we could not film in their country. The boat had gone already. Another boat had burnt out, so there seemed no way in which in the next 5 days we could actually get round Saudi Arabia. And we just had to work very, very hard on the Saudis, who eventually gave permission for myself and the director to drive across Saudi Arabia to Dubai, provided we did no filming on the way. And the rest of the crew were allowed to fly across to Dubai, because I was the only one who was actually supposed to do it all by land. So at least if I try, provided I didn't go into the air, we could keep the sort of the rules. Right, so that's how we did it in the end. But that took 2 or 3 days off us. Then we were on a dhow from Dubai, which was not part of the original plan. We were going to get a dhow actually from Oman. It was all been booked and all that. We got the right sort of dhow. The dhow we got in Dubai was quite by chance. It had no radio, it had no radar. There just happened to be a ship carrying bags of nuts or whatever across to Bombay. And there was no way of speeding it up. It went about 4 or 5 knots for 7 days. And there we were thinking, we've got a schedule to keep. And the days when the sun came down, went up, came down, went up, for 7 days. And I remember at one time on the, we were lying out on the deck of the dhow, and there was nowhere to sit on the dhow, just you lay on the sacks. And our sound man was very, very interested in flight schedules. He knew where every plane was going anywhere in the world, any time. And I can remember him looking up one day, after about day 5 or something like that, and he said, a plane flew over, going, travelling east. And he said, that'll be the 743 Heathrow to Bombay. It'll be in Bombay in an hour and 20 minutes. We're going to be in Bombay in 3 days. And that was the kind of, that was the difference. And I suddenly came home to me and looked utterly miserable. So that went wrong. And then the other real difficult area was after we had caught up on the Pacific leg of the journey, because we took these big container ships, and though they don't look very beautiful, they are quite fast, and much faster than any ships that would have been around, steamships that would have been around in Phileas Fogg's time. So we did that journey in 12 days as opposed to about 14 or 15. And we'd caught up, and we got self-confident, and we decided, as we took this wonderful train journey across America, the weather was so beautiful, the American landscape looked sparkling and pristine and lovely, we'd stop in the Rockies, and I'd do a balloon sequence and do some sledging, dog sledding, and that was all fine, until suddenly we realised we'd used up a valuable extra day. And then we got to New York and found that, once again, one of the boats we wanted to get had sailed ahead of us. We got on this boat in New York knowing that everything had to go absolutely right. That boat had to get across the Atlantic to the UK without any problems. A storm, any problem with the engines on the vessel, anything like that would ruin our chances. So the last 10 days went by in a state of mild panic, and at the very, very end, it was only the very last day, 79th day, and the 7th hour of the 79th day that we eventually got home. So it was very, very tight. Part of the problem with the journey, because getting there was the essence, the speed of movement was the essence, was that you saw some wonderful parts of the world, and then you were whisked away as soon as you could get the next train or the next boat out. And so there were certain places, particularly Singapore, where I never even saw Singapore because we were running late after the boat, the freighter that had brought us across the Bay of Bengal. We just had to make a ship-to-ship transfer in the middle of the night. So I never saw Singapore. Chicago, lovely city, which I've got to know much better since. I just saw the station and rushed from one platform to another. Again, there was no time to see it. New York, too. As soon as I got into New York. New York. Could have been there for a week. We were there for a few hours because we found that there was a boat sailing across the Atlantic there later that night. And I just had to get a taxi from Grand Central Station to Newark Docks. Not a fare that you usually take in New York. Great deal of confusion caused to the driver. But, that was my sort of 4-hour time in New York. So, yes, there was occasionally you had to give up the chance to see wonderful places in order to complete the journey on time. I mean, a number of the places that we went to on Around the World in 80 Days have since become places that I visit quite often. Venice is a city I'm very, very fond of. I've been back there many, many times since and have filmed there. Similarly, Cairo, we've actually been through on one of the other journeys. It intersected with our pole-to-pole journey. We came pole-to-pole and sort of intersected the Around the World in 80 Days journey at Cairo. So I've got to know Cairo quite well. Met up with the same people who'd helped us on Around the World in 80 Days. Been back to Japan on Full Circle. So I spent more time in the Tokyo that I just briefly glimpsed on Around the World in 80 Days. And Chicago, another place that I really got to know quite well. I mean, I don't deliberately go back over the ground, although I would actually love to meet some of the people again. I'd love to meet the crew of Gujarati Indians who took us indeed across the Persian Gulf, Indian Ocean to Bombay, because they were tremendous, and because their boat was very simple, very basic. They didn't have much room for us. They shared their food with us. They looked after us. They sort of made sure that we got there. It's a tricky journey, that one, and a great relationship which we grew up whilst we were actually all on the boat together in a way that doesn't really happen in real life because we come from such different backgrounds. But there, for 7 days, it really worked, and I'd love to go back and see them again. I think it'd just be terrific, but maybe I will, really, when I've stopped travelling. I never really knew what to expect from the series in the end. The doubts that I had at the beginning, which was this had not been done before, I'd never done anything like this before, I wasn't an expert on international travel, politics, economy, the countryside, nature, whatever. All these doubts remained with me as we were putting it together. I could see that certain sequences did work quite well, but it just tended to be me getting mad and going angry, we're stuck here and all that sort of thing, and complaining because I had a stomach ache and hadn't slept all night. I thought, well, who wants to hear this sort of stuff, really? But we put it together, and as best we could, assemble what we thought would be a good shape for the material. A very interesting thing happened in the editing of Around the World in 80 Days. We had been commissioned by the BBC to make 6 50-minute programmes. We had 2 editors, and a man called Dave Thomas had been given the job of editing, I think it was the 3rd programme, which was going to be Dubai through India to Madras and possibly even to Singapore. Dave looked at it and he said, look, this bit on the Dow, I'm supposed to get this down to about 10 minutes, but I just think there's too much there. I think it should be longer. So the director said, well, how much longer do you think it could be? So he said, well, give me a couple of days with it. So Dave went away and worked away, and the old-fashioned editing, we actually cut film and stuck it together and all that, as he did in those days. It wasn't video. And came back with a finished version. We said, well, how long does it run, Dave? He said, it runs 45 minutes. I said, 45 minutes? It's going to throw us completely. Then we looked at it, and then we realised that he had pinpointed what was good about that sequence, was that time passed very, very slowly. And if you cut it too tight, it just looked Michael, whoa, off he goes. And you missed the developing relationship. You missed the things we shared together. You missed the feeling that we just couldn't go any faster than the 7 knots. You missed the idea of just catching fish in the sea. You missed the whole thing about not feeling well, all the days going by on a journey which should have an urgency. And that was what made it so good. So we said, well, this is terrific. We'll go back to the BBC. We went to the BBC and said, look, can we have an extra 50 minutes? And it's quite extraordinary how a major broadcasting company sort of were not at all grateful. We said 6, and someone looks at the contract. What do you mean giving us 7? Well, it's just that there's one sequence which really does seem to work well at the greater length. And in the end, we won our battle, and everyone who's seen it said that's actually their, well, not everyone, but for most people, it's their favourite episode. So that's a triumph for Dave Thomas, our editor, now retired and growing marrows in Bristol, and he really sold that to us, and that's how we got 7 instead of 6 episodes. Did we expect the series to be as popular as it was? And it went from 7.8 million in the first episode to about 12.5 million saw the last one. Of course we didn't. I mean, we just didn't know how it was going to work at all. As I say, there was no precedent, nothing else to compare it to. And interestingly enough, I kind of realised that something rather special was happening after the 3rd episode went out. The reason was that I'd been asked to do a book signing at Stanford's big map shop in London. It was the first book signing for the Around the World in 80 Days book, which the BBC had also commissioned. And the book had been a bit late getting into the shops. But anyway, I was due to go there at 12:30. And it was the morning after the 3rd episode, the Dow episode, had actually gone out. And they rang me up from the shop and said, could you come in a little earlier? And I said, what do you mean? He said, could you come in at 9:30? It's just we've had so many orders. We'd like you to start signing. There's a queue already there. We'd like you to start signing as soon as possible. And it was just an amazing day. Absolutely, then I kind of realised that something had caught the popular imagination. And I was down there by about 10 o'clock, and there were indeed people already queuing up. And the whole of this shop had come to a halt, and the manager was sort of humping books around on trolleys and all that sort of thing, and looking terribly sort of ashen-faced. And we signed, and then I took a break at lunchtime, and then signed some more in the afternoon. And then I sort of realised that after that 3rd episode, I think people had realised that it was something different from what they'd seen before. Whereas the first one, slightly more traditional, and a lot of the critics were very, very sort of, poo-pooing about it. Oh, it's just another chance for someone to go on a luxury train ride from London to Paris and all that. And there were some wonderful ones which said, well, I think this will be the last of these programmes that Michael Palin ever make. Oh, I love things like that. And maybe they were right. But anyway, so by the 3rd one, I think, and certainly the 2nd with all the Saudi Arabian stuff as well, I think people realised that this was something unusual and different. But no, absolutely never expected that. And certainly never expected to repeat it with any programmes afterwards. I thought once we'd done that, that was that. But it certainly developed a style of travelling which you could apply to other parts of the world, even without the time constraint. But I think for many people it is the one they know best of all, and it's the one where there's an element of a competition, a race. And as a race, it was pretty exciting.